In this video I'm going to describe the installation of the Accu-Slice system on your bandsaw. When you ordered your Accu-Slice system, you should have ordered and received three components: an Accu-Slice index table, a rail, and a carriage. And you need all three components to have a complete Accu-Slice system. The only tools needed to install the system are two Allen drivers, a 3/16 and a 5/32, and also a Phillips head screwdriver. The installation of the Accu-Slice system begins with the attachment of the index table onto the bandsaw table. Depending on the size of your bandsaw table and the model Accu-Slice system you purchase, you may need to remove the bandsaw fence from your bandsaw. That's because these guide bars on the bottom of the Accu-Slice index table actually ride below the tabletop on your bandsaw. If you'd order a larger Accu-Slice system, then these guide bars are positioned further out in the bandsaw and will not interfere with the fence. And then you can leave the fence on those particular models of the bandsaw. This is my Laguna Model 1412 bandsaw, and this is our smallest Accu-Slice system, the Model AS173. And in order for this to operate on this bandsaw, the fence must be removed. However, I can put a larger Accu-Slice index table in here, which I'll show later, and I can put my fence back on my bandsaw. To install the Accu-Slice index table onto the bandsaw, first loosen the two coarse adjusting knobs on the Accu-Slice index table. Then slide the table back to reveal the Accu-Slice miter bar with the three offset cam locking screws. Next, position and center the bar into the miter bar slot on the bandsaw table. The guide bars on the Accu-Slice system must clear both sides of the bandsaw table, and if your fence is still attached, make sure it doesn't interfere with the operation of your fence. Make sure the miter bar is fully engaged into the miter bar slot on the bandsaw. While holding the indexing system flat against the bandsaw table, lightly tighten the three offset cam locking screws using a 3/16 Allen driver to lock it in place. Be careful not to over tighten these screws when you're tightening these offset cams. Next, I'm installing the rail to the index table. On the rail are 5 holes. 2 of these holes are for the alignment pins on the index table. The other 3 holes are for some 1/4 by 20 thread per inch screws, which are used to attach the rail to the index table. Carefully position and center the rail over the index plate, aligning the 2 pins on the plate with the 2 holes in the rail. And then using the 5/32 Allen driver, attach the screws which are included with the system. Be careful not to over tighten these screws, since this index plate on the Accu-Slice system is made from aluminum. I just installed the standard rail, which is 36 inches long. This rail is sufficient for most applications when cutting boards less than 20 inches long. The 36-inch long rail is normally used for the other carriages, including the Accu-Wedge for cutting segments and the Accu-Slot for cutting Celtic ring patterns. However, if you want to cut longer boards, we have additional lengths of rails, including a 48-inch long, 60-inch long, 72-inch long, and even a 96-inch long rail. There are several application notes and videos on our website demonstrating the cutting of long and wide boards with the Accu-Slice. As you can see, these rails are quickly and easily interchanged just by these 3 attachment screws. Next, we're going to describe the installation of the carriage onto the Accu-Slice system. On the bottom of the carriage are a series of roller bearings. These contain 2 stainless steel roller bearings with a polycarbonate sleeve. And these roller bearings ride on this channel on the Accu-Slice rail. And I usually use my fingers as a guide, just guide these roller bearings onto the slot on the rail, and they should slide easily and smoothly on the rail on the Accu-Slice system. To obtain the smoothest cuts, you don't want this L bracket to be able to rock back and forth on the rail. Also, you don't want it too tight that it's too tight to go through the system. These Outer roller bearings can be adjusted to eliminate rock or to make a less tight system. This is just an offset cam adjusting system, and there's a video on our website which describes how to adjust these roller bearings. However, in a new system, this should not be necessary because these roller bearings were adjusted when they left our shop. Next, I'm installing the sacrificial fence that came with the system, and installing this by attaching it to the carriage using the screws that came with the system. However, when I attach this to the carriage, I prefer just to not ride right on the bandsaw table. I like to leave a little bit of clearance so it doesn't bind. So what I've done in this case, I have a piece of veneer, just put that underneath the carriage, and then put my sacrificial fence against that, and then using the screws, attach it to the carriage. And these holes were pre-drilled so it's a bit easier to install. And then I could use a screwdriver to attach it, but to speed things up, I use a power driver. And then I remove this piece of veneer and slide cleanly and smoothly on the rail. If you prefer a sacrificial fence of your own design can be substituted. We typically use MDF or plywood or even plastic to make substitute fences. Often on my fences I pre-coat, I seal the surface with either shellac, varnish, polyurethane to give me a smooth surface. This is actually better when you're using double-sided tape to hold your wood to the fence. When I'm gluing boards to a fence, I just use the plain MDF with no pre-treatment. You can make different fences different sizes. Usually on my 12-inch carriage I have an 18-inch sacrificial fence. On my 24-inch carriage I have a 30-inch sacrificial fence. Typically most of my fences are 6 inches high, but when I'm cutting taller boards, I'll have a 12-inch high sacrificial fence. What is important is you always want the sacrificial fence supporting the board you're cutting. You don't want your wood hanging out the end of the sacrificial fence, otherwise you'll get vibration. And when you get this vibration, you'll get inaccurate cuts. So always want your wood supported by the sacrificial fence. This carriage is 12 inches long. If I was cutting a board 18 inches long, I put an 18-inch long sacrificial fence on here, and then that sacrificial fence would support my wood. Likewise, when I'm doing a tall board, I'll put a taller sacrificial fence on to support the taller board. But you always want the sacrificial fence supporting the board you're cutting. The boards you're cutting can be attached to the sacrificial fence in a number of different ways. They can be attached with double-sided tape, with clamps, with screws, or the board can even be glued to the sacrificial fence. And we'll show these applications in the next video on the operation of the Accu-Slice system. I've installed the fence back on my bandsaw, and now my model AS173 Accu-Slice system no longer fits on this bandsaw. This support for the rail for the fence is in the way and just won't fit. So this is the next larger size of the Accu-Slice system. This is the model AS216, which is 4 inches longer. And now these supports, these guide supports, are 4 inches further apart and actually can hang over the outside of this bar. So once again, same thing. Loosen up the bar, bring it back, drop the miter bar into the miter bar slot, and get it centered such that the mag jigs will clamp onto the table. Tighten it in place. And again, that works fine. It clears the support for the fence here, and it still is centered properly. Mag jigs still activate on the table. This is the next larger system of the Accu-Slice system, the model AS266, which is 24.5 inches between the guide blocks. So it's even larger distance to fit the table. And again, operates the same way. Release the rough knobs, tighten it in place in the miter slot, and it's ready to go, just like the other systems. My preference always has been to use a larger table. Gives you more table space, more support, and I just feel that it's more stable. The disadvantage, it is more expensive because there's a lot more metal involved in making this. On the two larger Accu-Slice index tables, the model AS216 and also the 266, they have these adjustable mag jig clamps. And this is done because on many of the bandsaws, the distance varies between the bandsaw blade and the miter slot. On systems such as this Laguna and the Jet, the Powermatic, the distance between the bandsaw blade and the miter slot is 3.5 inches. So in those systems, you have to position these magnets close to the front of this channel. However, in some of the larger bandsaws, and also bandsaws such as the Rikon system, the distance between the bandsaw blade and the miter slot is like 6 inches. So in those systems, you move these magnets all the way back to the channel on the Accu-Slice plate. And also, if perhaps you're running a board and the magnets end up over the miter bar, and of course they don't clamp to the miter bar because the miter bar is aluminum. So if that's the case, you just move these back away from the miter bar so that they clamp on the table. And to use these, you just position it where you want it, and then using a Phillips screwdriver, tighten the 2 screws and lock it in place. Before we begin the installation of the Accu-Slice system, we must first do some general maintenance on the bandsaw system itself. There's a number of videos on YouTube which describe this in quite a bit of detail, so I'll just touch on a few highlights that I think are important for the Accu-Slice system installation. We first of all begin by thoroughly vacuuming the system inside and out to remove all the sawdust, which I've already done in this case. I will follow this up with a general cleaning of the tires of the bandsaw. It's important that all the debris, sawdust that's been ground in, be removed. And this is most easily done with just a thin solution of soap and water, just to clean the 2 wheels. For bandsaw blade selection, the greater number of teeth per inch, the finer the cut you're going to get on your bandsaw. But it really depends on the thickness of the wood you're going to be cutting. If I'm resawing wood 4 inches and larger in thickness, I would probably use blades of 4 to 6 teeth per inch. If I'm cutting wood 1 to 3 inches thick, I would probably use blades of 6 to 8 teeth per inch. If I'm cutting segmented disc and smaller pieces of wood, I would probably use 8 to 10 teeth per inch. And if I'm doing the actual segment blocks for wood for making segmented disc, I might use 10 to 14 teeth per inch. We typically use blades of the rake tooth design, 1/2 inch in width. These are Timberwolf blades with a kerf of 50/1000ths of an inch. Yeah, I'm just going to install a blade according to the manufacturer's recommendations. It's standard practice in setting up your bandsaw that your blade be perfectly perpendicular to the surface on your bandsaw table. What I normally do when setting up the Accu-Slice system is make sure my blade is perfectly parallel to the surface on my sacrificial fence. And the reason this is important is because when I'm cutting a board, I have a board mounted on my sacrificial fence, and I'm cutting off sequential layers off this board, I want to get every ounce of wood cut off this board. And by having this blade perfectly parallel to the sacrificial fence, I get the maximum use of my wood. This is really not that critical, however, since when cutting a board, the first cut in the board provides a working surface, and all subsequent cuts are perfectly parallel to the surface. However, by having this blade perfectly parallel to this working surface of the sacrificial fence, I get every ounce of the edge off of my board. This is usually done by adjusting the bandsaw table. Usually underneath the bandsaw table there's 1 or 2 clamps that you can loosen. Then you can adjust the adjusting nut and reposition the table and then clamp it back in place. It is important that the bandsaw blade be perfectly parallel to the miter bar slot on the bandsaw table. This adjustment of the bandsaw is normally done during the manufacture of the bandsaw, but with time and use it may change. If the bandsaw blade is not parallel to the miter bar, then it will be necessary to adjust the tri-union on your bandsaw to align the blade. You can easily check this after the Accu-Slice system has been installed and you're cutting your first piece of wood. Take notice of the gap on the back edge of both sides of the bandsaw blade as it is cutting through the wood. There should be a visible gap on both sides of the board generated by the kerf of the bandsaw blade. If the back edge of the blade is touching either side of the board, you will get burn marks or shadow marks on your board from the blade touching the board. This is also the reason you see bandsaw blade drift when using your bandsaw. To adjust this, we normally use the corridor blade guides, and we'll be demonstrating this in a future video on adjusting the tri-unions on a number of different bandsaw blades. To remove the Accu-Slice system with the bandsaw, first of all, remove the carriage from the rail. You don't want that carriage falling off the rail and getting damaged. Next, loosen the force adjustment screws and the mag jigs. Slide the table back so you have access to the miter bar. And then turn the offset cam screws to release it from the miter bar slot. And then remove it from the bandsaw table. Removing the rail is optional. Usually the short rail I leave on, but if it's a long rail I take the rail off before I remove the index table. This concludes this video on the installation of the Accu-Slice system on your bandsaw. I hope it was helpful. However, if you have additional questions, concerns, or even suggestions, please feel free to give us a call or drop us an email. We'll be glad to talk with you. The next video in this series will describe the actual operation of the Accu-Slice system, including bandsaw blade selection and the various methods of attaching your wood boards to your sacrificial fence. We'll also describe some of the methods we use to cut long boards, wide boards, and other shapes of boards that are unique to the Accu-Slice system. Again, thank you for watching. This is a comparison of normal bandsaw slicing using the conventional bandsaw fence versus using the Accu-Slice system. This confirms that the Accu-Slice system provides for significant improvement in the smoothness and quality of the bandsaw cut. The bottom picture demonstrates that by adding the mag jig clamps, the quality of the bandsaw cut is even further improved.